Salah finds Peterson. Salahadin's plane flew over Athens early in the morning. From the aeroplane, he looked down on the ruins of the Acropolis. They looked wonderful in the early morning sunlight. But Saladin was not a tourist. He was a detective, and he had to find Peterson. Saladin took a taxi from the airport to Piraeus, the seaport of Athens. He got out of the taxi at Piraeus and went to an office at the dock gate. "What time does the Syria arrive from Alexandria?" he asked. "At midday," was the reply. "And it leaves again for Venice at 4 o'clock. It was only 6 o'clock in the morning. Saladin had a long time to wait. But Piraeus is full of small cafes and restaurants. Saladin passed the time drinking coffee and sleeping. At 11 o'clock, Saladin walked back to the docks. He tried to walk through the gate, but a policeman stopped him. "You can't go through the gate without a ticket," said the policeman. Saladin had an idea. The man in the office had said that the Syria was going to Venice. Saladin went back to the office and bought a first-class ticket to Venice. When he got into the docks, the Syria had not yet arrived. Saladin sat down on a box and waited. "Peterson is not an Egyptian name," thought Saladin. "It's another Swedish name like Borkman. Perhaps Peterson is Swedish also. I'll look for a man with fair hair. He'll be carrying a box." The Syria was half an hour late. It arrived in the docks at 12:30. Saladin watched the people getting off the boat. They were all Egyptian. There were some men with their wives and children, and many students. There was no one who looked Swedish. At that moment, someone appeared on the top deck of the Syria. He was a tall man with fair hair. "That's Peterson," thought Saladin. "So he's decided to stay on the boat. Perhaps he's going to Venice. I'll get on the boat and go to Venice too." But Saladin was careful. Perhaps it was a trick and Peterson was going to get off the boat at the last moment. Saladin waited, but no one else got off. At 5 o'clock, Saladin got on the boat. The gangway was taken down and the Syria was ready to leave. Saladin went to the ticket office on the boat and showed his ticket to the officer. "I've just got on the boat," said Saladin. "Can I have a cabin, please?" "You're traveling first class, sir," the officer said. "You can go into cabin 22. It's just under the top deck." The officer turned to get the key for cabin 22. "Wait a moment, sir," said the officer. "I'm sorry. I've made a mistake. Cabin 22 isn't empty. Mr. Peterson's in cabin 22. He's decided to go on to Venice. But cabin 23 is empty. You can go there." Saladin took the key from the officer, went to cabin 23 and sat down. He had found Peterson. Chapter 11. Saladin finds the black cat. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door of Saladin's cabin. It was the steward. "Do you want to eat in the dining room or in your cabin, sir?" asked the steward. "Where do people usually eat?" asked Saladin. "In the dining room," replied the steward. "But you can have your dinner in your cabin if you want." "That's an idea," said Saladin. "I'll eat here." "I'll bring you dinner at 8 o'clock then," said the steward, and walked down the corridor. Saladin watched the steward carefully. the steward walked to a small room under the stairs. Saladin took out his notebook and drew a plan of the corridor and the cabins. Here is the plan. After a few moments, the steward came out of his room and walked down the corridor. Saladin waited for 5 minutes. Everything was quiet in the corridor. Saladin left his cabin and walked quietly to the steward's room under the stairs. The steward had not locked the door. Saladin opened it carefully and looked in. The room was small, with brushes and cleaning things in it. There were some hooks on the wall. A key hung from every hook, and there was a number above each one. Saladin took the key of cabin 22 and went to the door. Suddenly, he heard a noise. Peterson had come back. He was standing at the door of his cabin. Saladin waited in the steward's room. Peterson went into his cabin and closed the door. Saladin quietly went back to his own cabin, sat down and listened. There was the noise of music. Peterson had turned on a radio. Then there was the noise of running water. Peterson was having a shower. Saladin had a shower too, got dressed and waited. A few minutes later, there was a knock at his door. The steward had brought Saladin's dinner. At the same time, Peterson came out of his cabin. He locked the door and walked down the corridor. Peterson was going to the dining room. The steward went away, and Saladin was left alone. He looked out into the corridor. Everything was quiet. Saladin left his cabin and crossed the corridor. He put the key in the lock of cabin 22 and quietly opened the door. Then he went into the cabin and shut the door carefully behind him. Saladin looked round the cabin. There was a case on top of the cupboard and some clothes on the bed. But he did not see a box. He looked inside the shower room. It was empty. The black cat must be here, thought Saladin. Where has he hidden it? Then he had an idea. The shower room was very high. Saladin looked up. There was a box placed above the shower. Saladin lifted the box down on the bed and started to open it. But something had gone wrong. There was a noise, and the door of cabin 22 suddenly opened. There was a man in the doorway. It was Peterson, and he had a gun in his hand. The gun was pointing at Saladin. Chapter 12. Death on the Syria. "Don't move," said Peterson. Peterson came into the cabin and shut the door. Saladin stood still in front of the bed. "Who are you?" asked Peterson. "And what are you doing in my cabin?" Saladin thought quickly. He had to say something. "Borkman sent me," he said. "I have a message for you." "You're telling lies," said Peterson. "There's something on the bed. Stand back." Saladin moved back, and Peterson saw the open box. "So, you've found the black cat," said Peterson. "You're a member of the Red Hand Gang." Peterson opened the door and looked out into the corridor. It was empty. "Put your hands behind your back and come out of the cabin," said Peterson. "Then walk slowly up the stairs to the top deck." Saladin came out of the cabin and Peterson followed him. Saladin walked slowly up the stairs. When they reached the top deck, Peterson spoke again. "Walk over to the rail." There was a rail round the side of the ship. Over the rail was the sea. The Syria had now passed through the Corinth Canal, and the ship was rolling from side to side. Saladin walked slowly forward towards the funnel. "Stop," said Peterson. "Turn round." Saladin turned and looked at Peterson. "Now, tell me the truth," said Peterson. "Who are you?" Saladin decided to tell some truth and some lies. "Borkman's dead," said Saladin. "And Yusuf is caught. The Baalbek gang is finished. The police are waiting for you at Venice." "I don't believe you," said Peterson. "How do you know this? Who are you?" "I'm an inspector in the Egyptian police," replied Saladin. "I've followed you from Beirut. The Italian police are waiting for you at Venice." "You're telling lies again," said Peterson. "Why didn't you bring the police onto the boat at Athens?" Saladin did not reply, and Peterson started to laugh. "You didn't tell anyone at Athens," he said. "There's no one waiting for this boat at Venice. Now I'm going to shoot you. I'll throw your body into the sea and no one will ever know." Suddenly, Peterson lifted his gun. At the same moment, a large wave shook the side of the ship. Peterson was thrown against the rail, and the gun fell onto the deck. For a second, both men looked at the gun, then at each other. The wind pressed hard against them. Neither of them moved forward. Peterson was the first to move. He tried to pick up the gun, and Saladin ran straight at him. He held Peterson round the neck and pushed him over the rail. Peterson fell backwards over the rail and disappeared into the angry sea below. There was a scream. Then there was silence. Saladin walked slowly away from the rail and sat down on the deck. No one came. Everyone was busy eating dinner. No one had heard the noise. Chapter 13. Do not disturb the corridor outside cabin. 22 was still empty. Everything was silent. Saladin went into the cabin and picked up the box carefully. Then he carried it across the corridor to his own cabin. He went back across the corridor once more. In every cabin there was a notice with the words, "Do not disturb," written on it in large letters. Saladin took this notice and hung it on the door of cabin 22. "The steward will see this on the door," thought Saladin to himself. "He'll think that Peterson is sick. No one will go into cabin 22 until Venice." He locked the door of cabin 22 and put the key on its hook in the steward's room. Then Saladin went back to his own cabin. The food was still on the table, but he was not hungry. He threw it out of the window. Saladin looked at his watch. He was surprised. It was only 8:45. A lot had happened in a short time. After a few minutes, there was a knock at the door. It was the steward. "I hope that you enjoyed your dinner, sir," he said to Saladin. "Thank you," replied Saladin. "I enjoyed it very much." "Mr. Peterson's put the 'Do not disturb' notice on his door," said the steward. "Perhaps he's sick. I'll not disturb him until Venice." "Yes," said Saladin. "I met him half an hour ago. He said that he felt sick. He'll not want anything until tomorrow." "When do you want breakfast, sir?" asked the steward. "I feel tired," replied Saladin. "Don't wake me in the morning. When I want breakfast, I'll call you." "Good night, then," said the steward. Saladin said good night and locked his door. He had not slept on a bed for many hours and he was very tired. He undressed and got into bed. At first, the movement of the boat kept him awake, but he was soon asleep and slept deeply all night. When Salahadin woke up the next morning, the bright sun was shining into his cabin. He looked at his watch. It was nearly 11 o'clock. He rang the bell for the steward. "When do we arrive in Venice?" asked Salahadin. "We're early today," replied the steward. "We'll be there in 2 hours, but you don't need to get off the boat immediately. You can have lunch first." "No, thank you," said Salahadin. "I want to get off the boat as soon as possible. What about Mr. Peterson? Is he better?" "He still has the notice on his door," replied the steward. "I'll not disturb him until after lunch." "That's a good idea," said Salahadin. "Now, can you bring me some coffee, please?" Salahadin drank his coffee slowly and got dressed. He heard a lot of noise. The ship was arriving at Venice. Salahadin looked out into the corridor. It was empty. The steward had gone to the dining room. Salahadin picked up the heavy box and left the cabin. From the side of the boat, Salahadin saw the tall buildings of Venice. They were passing in front of St. Mark's Cathedral. They were now near the docks. After half an hour, the boat was beside the dock. Salahadin left the Syria while the other passengers were having lunch. "What's in that box?" asked a policeman. "Some books," replied Salahadin. He did not want any trouble. The policeman did not ask Salahadin to open the box. In a few minutes, Salahadin was in a water taxi on his way to the railway station. Safe at last, thought Salahadin. When they open cabin 22, they'll find it empty. They'll be very surprised. Chapter 14. Return to Cairo. Salahadin took the first train from Venice to Rome. The next morning, he was on a plane for Cairo. The plane was late, and he did not arrive until after 10 o'clock in the morning. The sun was high in the sky, and it was getting hotter and hotter. Salahadin felt better. He preferred the heat of Cairo to the cold deck of the Syria. He took a taxi to his flat. There was a surprise waiting for him. Layla and Fuad were there. Fuad explained. "We arrived this morning from Beirut," he said. "We were worried about you. You didn't send a telegram. We thought that something had happened." "Of course, the telegram," said Salahadin. "I forgot to send you a telegram. I'm really sorry." "We phoned the police here in Cairo," said Fuad. "No one knew anything about you. We were very worried." "It's my fault," said Salahadin. He told them what had happened. They were happy that he was safe back in Cairo. "And this is the box," said Layla. "The black cat is in this box. Let's open it." Salahadin opened the box and lifted out the black cat. "It doesn't look very valuable," said Layla. "I don't like it at all." "We don't know its value," said Salahadin. "We'll take it to the Cairo Museum tomorrow." "Then you can have a holiday," said Layla. "You need a rest. Perhaps you'll show us round Cairo." "That won't be a rest," replied Salahadin. "But it's a good idea." "I'm going to make coffee," said Layla. "Do you both want some?" "Yes, please," replied Salahadin. "I want some coffee and I want your story, Fuad. What happened at Baalbek?" And Fuad told his story. I went to the Beirut police, Fuad began, and told them about Barkman's death. They asked a lot of questions. Police always ask a lot of questions, said Salahaddin. I told them about Peterson, continued Fuad, and I said that you had gone to Athens. Did they believe you? Not at first, replied Fuad. Then I told them about the black cat. I gave them Barkman's message. I told them about the cafe in Baalbek and about Youssef. Then they believed me. And what happened next? Asked Salahaddin. The police asked me to help them, replied Fuad. It wasn't possible for a policeman to go into Youssef's cafe. The people there knew all the policemen. Youssef was a clever man. The police had to trick him, and they asked me to go to Baalbek. They wanted me to go into the cafe and give Youssef the message from Barkman. I went to Baalbek in the evening, continued Fuad. I found Youssef's cafe. It was near the ruins of the old city. I sat down and asked for coffee. Then I asked for Youssef. I told Youssef about Borkman's death. The police were waiting outside, Fuad continued. They were hiding in a car. I told Youssef about the black cat and he thanked me. Then he hurried out of the cafe. And the police saw him? Asked Salahaddin. Yes, said Fuad. They watched him carefully. Where did Youssef go? He got into a car, replied Fuad, and drove to a farm in the mountains. The police followed him. Then they hid in the hills round the farm and waited. How many men were at the farm? Salahaddin asked. The police didn't know, replied Fuad. They waited for more police. Then they shouted to the men at the farm and told them to come out. Didn't the men at the farm shoot at the police? No, they didn't, replied Fuad. There were only 3 of them at the farm. Barkman was dead and Peterson was on the Syria. The 3 men came out without shooting. The police took them away. They're now in prison. Did they catch the leader of the gang? Asked Salahaddin. Youssef was the leader, replied Fuad. He's now in prison with the others. Youssef's in prison, said Salahaddin. Borkman's dead and so is Peterson. That's the end of the Baalbek gang. And 3 of the Red Hand gang were killed in the black car, said Layla. That's true, said Salahaddin. We'll have no more trouble for some time. Chapter 15. The end. The next morning, Salahaddin went with Layla and Fuad to the Cairo Museum. They took the black cat with them. They met a friend called Faisal who worked in the museum. Salahaddin gave the black cat to Faisal and told him the story. It looks old, said Faisal, and perhaps it's valuable, but I don't know about the gold and diamonds. I'll have to look at it carefully. Salahaddin, Layla, and Fuad went and had some coffee. They came back to the museum about 2 hours later. Well, what's the answer? Asked Fuad. It's very old, replied Faisal, but it's not made of gold and there are no diamonds. The eyes and collar are made of stone. The cat is made of a heavy kind of wood. So it isn't valuable, said Layla. 7 men have died for a piece of wood. No, you're wrong, said Faisal. It's very, very valuable. It's more than 2,000 years old. The gold and diamonds aren't important. Perhaps there really was a gold cat, said Salahaddin. Perhaps tomb robbers stole the real cat thousands of years ago. Then they put this wooden cat into the tomb. We'll never know, said Fuad, but we're lucky to have this one. Yes, we are lucky, said Faisal. Can we have it for our museum? Of course you can, replied Salahuddin. This is the right place for it. Come back in November, said Faisal. Then you'll see the black cat in its right place. And we'll come back too, said Layla. Fuad's been working too hard. He needs a real holiday. We'll come back to Cairo for 2 weeks in November. That's a good idea, said Faisal. I'll see you all then. 6 months later, Salahuddin was sitting in his office. Summer was over and the weather was getting cool. The telephone rang. You remember your promise, don't you? Asked Faisal. My promise? To come to the museum, continued Faisal. The new room is going to be opened tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Oh, of course, said Salahuddin. I'll be there. The next morning, there was a crowd of people in the museum. Faisal met Salahuddin and took him to the new room. There was a large notice outside the door. The treasures of Ankhetan archaeologists had found the tomb of Ankhetan. Pearson's map had helped them. They had brought many things from the tomb to Cairo. They were all in this room. Ahmed was standing in the middle of the room. He was talking to Fuad and Layla. The taxi driver who had taken Barkman to Cairo station was there also. Salahuddin went over to say hello. Do you see what's behind me? Asked Ahmed. There, in the center of the room, was a large glass case. The black cat was inside. Underneath, there was a notice. The Black Cat of Ankhetan, given by Salahuddin I Nur.